The War of Civilizations. Prologue. Throughout history, humanity has looked to the sky with a desire to understand what lies beyond. But the truth, hidden in layers of myth and shadow, was much closer than they could have ever imagined. Beneath the ice of Antarctica, in the depths of the earth and in the stars that watched over it, point two pillars of cosmic existence united for the first time in front of people. The Gorduy, the giant builders, heirs of stone and ancestral memory, and the Elyrians, beings of light and spirit, keepers of universal harmony. Alongside them appeared two legendary figures, 𝕮𝖆𝖵, known among people as Lieutenant Liam, nicknamed the Bridge of Light, and 𝕍𝖆𝖵, Lieutenant Naomi, the Witness of Life, read Trilogy Beyond Antarctica. They were messengers between worlds, sent to bring unity between Earth and the stars. But humanity was not prepared. When the Gorduy and alien ships descended into the sky, leaving behind bright lights that lit up the oceans and deserts, people watched with fear, not understanding. Fear turned to suspicion, suspicion to hostility, and hostility to war. The first fire was fired not by the Gorduy or the Elyrians, but by humans. Fearing to lose their power, the governments of the world declared invasion, and thus began the War of Civilizations, a conflict that would last a century of flames and ash. Cities burned by human weapons and entire plains lit by the energies of the Gorduy, a century in which the Elyrians raised shields of light, not to destroy, but to protect. But with each year, with each battle, the balance between civilizations crumbled. 𝕮𝖆𝖵 and 𝕍𝖆𝖵 remained between the fronts, carrying the burden of being the link between two worlds that could no longer understand each other. They were the hope of a common future, but also witnesses to a deepening tragedy. This is not just a war of arms. It is a war of fear against light, of memory against oblivion, of man against himself. And now, after 100 years, the world asks itself, who will survive? The united civilizations or the humanity that refused to listen? Chapter 1. The Descent of the Two Civilizations. The sky of Earth had never been so alive. On a night that should have been like any other, people watched as the stars changed their positions, forming impossible geometric circles and lines. Astronomers, military men, and poets alike looked up to that symphony of light, convinced that they were living an unrepeatable moment. Beyond the blue atmosphere, beyond the orbit of the moon, two colossal ships advanced. Like floating continents, Point One seemed to be built of living stone, immense, with black crystal edges and corners reminiscent of ancient temples. The other was unlike anything humans could have conceived. It was fluid, translucent, ever-changing, as if light itself had gathered in the shape of an arch. It was Gorduy and the Elyrians, returning to Earth. No one had ever truly believed in legends. The pyramids, sphinxes, stone temples scattered around the world had been seen only as relics of an overly ambitious human civilization. But that night, the truth rose above any theory. The Gorduy giants, builders of the first monuments, were returning. Alongside them, the people of light, the Elyrians, those beings that the ancient manuscripts spoke of as celestial messengers, were showing themselves again. Their goal was not conquest, but healing. The first days of the descent were a mixture of amazement and fear. The huge ships anchored near desert areas, far from cities, so as not to cause panic. However, the energy waves emanating from them were felt hundreds of kilometers away, shaking technological instruments and causing earthquakes of light. When the Gorduy giants stepped on the earth, the world fell silent. They were 5 meters tall, their bodies covered in a kind of organic armor, as if the stone itself was their flesh. Each of their steps made the ground vibrate, but their eyes showed no cruelty, but a deep melancholy, as of beings who carried the weight of millions of years of memories. They were the keepers of 𝕮𝖆𝖵, the stone of memory, the relic in which each generation of Gorduy had deposited its echo. The Elyrians, on the other hand, emerged like solidified rays of sunlight. Human silhouettes, but translucent, as if the light had drawn their bodies. They moved gracefully, sometimes floating a few centimeters above the ground, and when they touched people, they felt an inner peace, like a deep relief. They carried 𝕉𝖃, the heart of knowledge, the sphere that pulsated with the light of life and could connect the mind with the universe. At first, people watched with awe. Many fell to their knees, convinced that the gods were returning. But the leaders, accustomed to viewing everything through the prism of power, raised questions. Why now? What do they want from us? What does their peace really mean? The initial meeting between the two civilizations and humanity took place in a huge crystal hall, erected by the Elyrians in a single night, above the ruins of an ancient fortress. Dozens of human leaders were invited there. Entering, they saw how the transparent walls reflected not only their faces, but also memories from the past. Wars, inventions, moments of suffering and glory. It was as if the building itself had read their souls, and in the center of the hall stood the two people who had been chosen as intermediaries, 𝕉𝖆𝖵, Lieutenant Liam, the Bridge of Light, and 𝕉𝖆𝖵, Lieutenant Naomi, the Witness of Life. Even before the delegations arrived, they carried the sacred relics within them. Their oath, taken on the planet Elyrian, had given them a role as a link between the worlds. The Gorduy spoke first, through the voice of Thamros, the oldest of them. His voice, it was like thunder rolling deep in the mountain. I came not to conquer you, but to remind you. The earth is our common home. We built the first stones to show you the way to the stars. But you have forgotten. We have come to remind you that you are more than warriors of your fear. The Elyrians continued, through Saratha's voice, a crystalline sound like a harp. We kindled the light of your thought. We watched when you discovered fire, when you raised your eyes to the sky and wondered where you came from. We are not gods, but older brothers. And we have returned to share peace, not the sword. The hall vibrated with emotion, but also with suspicion. People looked towards the Bridge of Light and the Witness of Life. The two seemed at the same time fragile and frighteningly powerful, carrying the traces of other worlds in their gazes. 𝕉𝖆𝖵 rose. His voice, amplified by 𝕉𝖆𝖵, the memory stone of the Gorduy civilization, rang out clearly. They do not want to lead us, but to teach us. I swore to be the bridge between them and you, to convey the truth, not the lie. Know that fear is great, but fear only breeds war. 𝕉𝖆𝖵 completed him, touching the luminous sphere of 𝕉𝖃, memory of the Elyrian civilization, with his hand. I have seen the future. If we refuse this gift, only destruction awaits us. If we accept it, we can flourish again. And those early days, two camps formed among the leaders of Earth. Some wanted to accept the gift of peace. Others saw in Gorduy and the Elyrians a threat to their own authority. How could there be kings, presidents, or generals, if beings of light and immortal giants appeared before them? And then the question arose that shook the balance. What happened to the kidnapped people? With 𝕉𝖆𝖵, Lieutenant Liam, and 𝕉𝖃, Lieutenant Naomi. When the truth came out, that they were not prisoners, but allies of the civilizations, suspicion exploded. Many cried out that these two were no longer human, that they had been transformed, corrupted. How can our voice be heard if they are no longer among us? In the nights that followed, many people dreamed of the faces of the Elyrians. They woke up crying or calm, as if touched by an unseen power. And other places, soldiers swore that they had seen giant Gorduy standing guard near ancient temples, silent watchmen who did not touch anyone. But the governments were afraid, and their fear began to give birth to hidden plans. The descent of the two civilizations was not an act of domination, but a calling. They brought with them gifts, healing technologies, knowledge of the cosmos, memories of the early days of humanity. But instead of applause, they received suspicion. Instead of gratitude, they received accusations. And in the eyes of the two witnesses, the Bridge of Light and the Witness of Life, The heavy burden of the future was already felt. They knew that the oath taken on Aelion would not be easy to bear. Because humanity, instead of seeing an outstretched hand, saw a shadow that had to be chased away. Thus began the story. Not with raised weapons, not with explosions, but with a smoldering distrust. The descent of the two civilizations had been a gift, a call to peace. But for humans, peace was a suspicious word. And in that mixture of light and suspicion, the spark of a war that would last a century was already born.